never thought taking the subway home after work would become something I'd be afraid of. But after what happened over the next few nights, I haven't stepped onto a late-night platform since. At the time, I was working for a publishing company in New York City, and because of a major deadline, I'd been leaving the office close to midnight almost every night. Normally, I'd be home by 8, but that night, when I finally walked out of the building, it was 11:58 p.m. The subway was the fastest way home, so I headed to the station like I always did. As soon as I stepped onto the platform, something felt off. It wasn't completely empty. There were only 2 people there, me and a man standing at the far end of the platform. He was wearing a dark grey jacket with both hands tucked into his pockets. The strange part wasn't how he looked. It was the fact that he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't checking his phone, he wasn't looking down the tracks. He was just looking at me. At first, I figured I was imagining things. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through social media, trying not to think about it. A few seconds later, I glanced up again. He hadn't moved. He was still standing in the exact same spot, still watching me. The train finally arrived. I got on immediately, expecting him to board too. But he didn't. The doors closed. The train pulled away. As I looked through the window, I saw him still standing on the platform, watching the train disappear. I convinced myself it was just a weird coincidence. The next night, another late shift, another trip home, and when I walked onto the platform, he was there again, same jacket, same spot. This time there were a few more people waiting for the train. I purposely walked to the opposite end of the platform. I didn't even look at him. A minute later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up. He had moved, not toward me, but to the opposite end of the platform, directly across from where I was standing. He never came any closer. He never spoke. He just stood there, looking at me. That was the first night I actually felt scared. The train arrived. I got on. Right before the doors closed, I looked back one last time. He wasn't smiling. He didn't wave. He just stood there with a completely blank expression, watching me leave. When I got home that night, I told myself, I'm taking a cab tomorrow. But the next evening, work ran late again, and once again, the subway was my only option. The following night, I decided I wasn't going to stand at either end of the platform. Instead, I stayed right in the middle, where there were security cameras and better lighting. The moment I walked down the stairs, my stomach dropped. He was there again, standing in the exact same place. It was almost like he already knew what time I'd arrive. I pulled out my phone and pretended to be talking to someone, but every few seconds I'd catch myself looking in his direction. One train came, people got off, people got on. He never moved. Another train arrived. Still nothing. I intentionally let that train leave. I wanted to see if he would stay. He did. By then, I knew this wasn't a coincidence anymore. Without looking at him, I boarded the third train that pulled in. The doors started closing. Just before they shut, I glanced through the window one last time. For the first time, he finally moved, but he wasn't walking toward me. He slowly turned and walked toward the station exit. That was it. The train pulled away. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What did he want? Why had he been standing there every single night? When I got home, I decided that if I ever saw him again, I'd report it to the police. The truth was, I didn't really have anything to report. He had never touched me. He had never spoken to me. He had never followed me. He had only stood there, watching. The next morning, while I was getting ready for work, I reached into my jacket pocket and felt something folded inside. At first, I assumed it was an old receipt, but when I unfolded it, it was a worn-out New York City subway map. Someone had circled one station with a red marker, the exact station where I got off every night. Underneath the circle, there was a single handwritten sentence. "See you tomorrow." I froze. That map wasn't mine, and I knew no one had touched my jacket. After that day, I changed my route. A few weeks later, I changed jobs, and I never took the subway home late at night again. But even now, whenever I see a New York subway map, my eyes always drift to that station, because after all these years, there's still one question I can never answer. How did that map end up in my pocket? People always say abandoned trains are empty. After what happened to me, I know that's not always true. This happened about 3 years ago. Back then, I spent most of my weekends exploring abandoned rail yards and forgotten freight lines looking for places to paint. I've been doing graffiti for years. Some people call it art, others call it vandalism. Honestly, I've stopped caring what people think. One rule I always followed was simple: never paint somewhere people actually go. The quieter the place, the better. That night, my friend Ethan and I drove almost 40 minutes outside the city after I found an abandoned freight yard on Google Maps. The place looked completely forgotten. Rusted tracks stretched into the darkness. Old freight cars sat motionless. Some of them looked like they hadn't moved in decades. Ethan wasn't really into graffiti. He mostly came because he hated letting me wander around places like that alone. Looking back, I'm glad he did. Before we started, he lit a joint. I wasn't much of a smoker anymore. Weed had started making me anxious over the last couple of years, but I took a few hits anyway. The train looked perfect. No fresh graffiti, no old tags, nothing. It felt like nobody had touched it in years. I smiled. Looks like we got here first. Ethan looked around the yard instead of the train. Then he quietly said, "I don't know. This place feels wrong." I laughed. That's exactly why it's perfect. I grabbed my first can, shook it, and started painting. About 20 minutes later, I'd finished 3 clean pieces across 3 different freight cars. Honestly, they looked better than I expected. I stepped back to admire them, then tossed my empty spray cans behind me without even thinking. The first one bounced across the tracks. The second disappeared somewhere between the train cars. A few seconds later, Ethan suddenly stopped talking. He was staring toward the far end of the train. Without taking his eyes off the darkness, he asked, "Did you invite somebody?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" I just heard footsteps. Inside the train. I listened carefully. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the broken rail yard. "It's probably an animal," I said, even though I'd heard something too. A faint metallic sound, like someone dragging steel across the floor. Neither of us moved. The silence somehow felt louder than before. Then, something rolled out from underneath one of the freight cars. It slowly stopped, right in front of my boots. I looked down. It was the same empty spray can. The one I'd thrown away less than a minute earlier. The tracks were completely flat. There was no hill, no slope. Nothing that could have made it roll back toward us. Ethan looked at me. His face had completely changed. He whispered, "We're not alone." And before I could answer, a heavy metallic crash echoed from somewhere deep inside the last freight car. Both of us instinctively turned toward the sound. The train hadn't moved. Nothing came out, no voices, no footsteps, just darkness, watching us. For about 10 seconds. Neither of us moved, neither of us said a word. Then Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "Let's get out of here. Now." I nodded, but before leaving, I glanced back at the graffiti I had just finished. I figured I'd snap one quick picture before we left. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera. The moment I pointed it toward the train, the door on the last freight car, slowly, began to slide open. The sound echoed through the empty rail yard. We both froze. The door opened all the way, but nobody stepped out. Just darkness. Pitch black darkness. Then, one of my empty spray cans came flying out of the train. It bounced across the gravel and stopped right at our feet. That was all the proof we needed. Someone was inside. Ethan grabbed my arm. "Run!" We turned and took off. We had barely made it 30 yards when a man's voice echoed behind us. "Keep running. Just don't come back." He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. His voice was calm, way too calm, the kind of calm that makes your stomach drop. Then, a gunshot exploded behind us. The round cracked somewhere over our heads. Neither of us looked back. We just kept running. We didn't stop until we reached the main road. When we finally got back to my truck, neither of us spoke for several minutes. That night, I realized real fear doesn't make you scream. It makes you completely silent. About a month later, curiosity got the better of me. I went back, this time in broad daylight and alone. I just wanted to know who had been out there. Everything looked exactly the same. The same tracks, the same abandoned freight train, except my graffiti was gone. Every single tag had been covered with thick red paint. Someone had deliberately erased every trace that I'd ever been there. I kept walking. A few cars farther down, one of the freight doors was standing halfway open. I looked inside and immediately stopped. The car was completely empty, except for one old metal chair sitting perfectly in the center. Around it, heavy ropes, rusted chains, and long scrape marks across the floor. But the strangest part wasn't the chair. The entire train car smelled overwhelmingly of bleach. Not a little, not enough to notice. It was so strong, it burned my nose, like someone had dumped gallons of bleach across the entire floor. I slowly reached for my phone. I wanted one picture, just one. Then, from somewhere deeper inside the train, I heard it again. Metal striking metal. I didn't wait to hear it twice. I backed out of the car, turned around, and sprinted all the way back to my truck. And to this day, I still don't know who was living out there, or why they erased my graffiti, or why there was a chair, chains, and enough bleach to make your eyes water. But one thing has never left my mind. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and sometimes the people still hiding there don't appreciate visitors. I never painted another abandoned train after that. And honestly, you couldn't pay me enough money to ever go back. This happened about 4 years ago. That night, I had boarded a downtown train at 59th Street Columbus Circle Station on my way home. It was around 11:50 p.m. I was already sitting by the window in one of the quietest subway cars on the train. The entire car was almost empty. I was exhausted. All I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and go straight to bed. The train slowed into the next station. The doors slid open. A few people stood on the platform, but only one man stepped inside my car. He looked to be somewhere in his mid-40s, dark blue overcoat, an old leather messenger bag. Nothing about him looked unusual. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't acting suspicious. If anything, he looked like someone who had just finished work, just like me. Instead of sitting down immediately, he stayed near the doors until the train started moving again. Then, without saying a word, he slowly walked toward me. The entire subway car was empty. He could have picked any seat. Instead, he sat directly across from me. I glanced at him for a second, then looked back out the window. At first, I didn't think much of it. For almost a minute, neither of us spoke. Then he suddenly asked, "Do you work late almost every night?" I looked up. "Excuse me?" He repeated himself. "Do you work late almost every night?" I frowned. "Do I know you?" A small smile appeared on his face. "No. I've just been seeing you for days." For a second, I honestly thought he'd mistaken me for someone else. "I think you've got the wrong person." He slowly shook his head. "I don't think I do." Then he went completely silent. No smile, no questions, nothing. He simply stared out the opposite window. For some reason, that silence bothered me more than the conversation. A minute later, I unlocked my phone. Almost immediately, he spoke again. "You usually leave work around this time?" I looked up so fast I almost dropped my phone. He still wasn't looking at me. I didn't answer. The train stopped again. A couple looked into the car, then decided to walk into another one. The doors closed. Once again, we were completely alone. I reached into my bag and pulled out my earbuds. I figured if I ignored him, he'd eventually stop talking. Before I could even put one in, he quietly said, "You shouldn't wear headphones this late." I froze. He continued, still looking out the window. People stopped paying attention to who's sitting right next to them. A chill ran down my spine. I slowly put the earbuds back into my pocket. I tried convincing myself he was just socially awkward. Maybe he'd seen me around before. Maybe this was all one big misunderstanding. But deep down, something felt wrong. The train slowed into another station. That was it. I decided I wasn't spending another minute in the same car. As soon as the doors opened, I got up, walked into the next subway car, and found another seat. For the first time that night, I actually felt relieved. I honestly believed that was the last time I'd see him. About 30 seconds later, the doors between the cars opened. I looked up. My stomach dropped. It was him. He had followed me. This time, he didn't sit across from me. He stayed near the doors, occasionally glancing in my direction, like he was waiting for something. I looked away and pretended not to notice. But every few seconds, I caught his reflection in the subway window. Every time I looked, he was still watching me. For the first time that night, I noticed the emergency help information posted above the doors. Part of me wanted to press the intercom. The other part kept telling me, what if I'm just overreacting? After all, he hadn't threatened me. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't technically done anything wrong. A few minutes later, A transit employee walked into the car checking tickets. As he reached my seat, he paused for a second. Then, in a low voice, he asked, "Ma'am, do you know that gentleman?" I looked at him. Then I looked at the man standing near the doors. I quietly shook my head. "No." The employee gave me a quick nod, then walked straight toward him. The two of them spoke for a few seconds. I couldn't hear what they were saying. A moment later, the employee came back. He leaned down slightly and said, "Stay where you are. We've got someone waiting at the next stop." That was the moment I realized it wasn't just me. Someone else had noticed something was off. When the train reached the next station, 2 more transit employees stepped inside. They walked directly toward the man. One of them calmly said, "Sir, we'd like you to step off the train with us." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up his bag, looked at me one last time, and quietly said, "Next time, choose a busier car." Then he stepped off the train. The doors closed. And just like that, he disappeared into the station. Only after the train started moving again did I realize my hands were shaking. A few minutes later, the same employee returned to check on me. He asked if I was okay. I nodded. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You're not the first woman who's reported him." I stared at him. He continued, "He never threatens anyone. He never physically touches anyone. He's never done enough for us to arrest him. But somehow, he always ends up sitting next to women traveling alone late at night." I asked, "So, nothing can be done?" He sighed. "Not unless he actually commits a crime." For the rest of the ride, the subway staff checked on me every few stops. I made it home safely that night. But that ride changed the way I travel forever, even now. If I have to take the subway late at night, I never sit in an empty car. I'd rather stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers than ride alone, because to this day, I still don't know what that man really wanted. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to find out.